Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Let's talk about pointing nouns. We will do lots of lessons on pointing nouns. In each lesson, we'll take a small amount of new information, new vocabulary. So this is just an introduction to pointing nouns. Pointing nouns are used to point at people or things. Pointing nouns also have number and gender. So you have singular, dual, plural, number, and you have masculine and feminine gender. The first pointing noun for us to know is hadha, and hadha means this. Hadha means this, and it's for you singular masculine. Now, if you look carefully at the word hadha, it consists of ha followed by alif, followed by dha, followed by alif. So it's actually 4 letters, but it looks like 3 letters. Okay. And this alif that's written here is called alif khanjariyah or dagger alif. It looks like a little dagger. It's hovering up above. And for some reason, they did not write it in the Mus'haf. So originally, it's supposed to be like this, hadha, like this. Why didn't they write this alif? It could be for different reasons. It could be because it's easier, shorthand, or it could be to accommodate variant Quranic recitations. So that's why you see sometimes alif is not written clearly. It's kind of a small little alif that's kind of hovering up above. And this alif in Urdu, they call it khadi zabar. Okay, so hadha is written without an alif. Okay, so this alif is not written, and instead you have the dagger alif, and it consists of 4 letters: ha, alif, dha, alif, and it means this. The feminine version of hadha is hadhihi. Hadhihi is like this, aslan. Aslan originally, it's like this. Again, the dagger alif. So the number of letters for hadhihi is 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 letters that look like actually 3 letters. So hadhihi is used to point at a female or a feminine object. Hadha is used to point at a masculine male or a masculine object. So it's used both for people and object. Both hadha and hadhihi are used for people and objects. So if I'm pointing at a boy, I say hadha. If I'm pointing at a girl, I say hadhihi. If I'm pointing at the sun, sun or shams is grammatically feminine, I say hadhihi shams, hadhihi ash-shams. And if I'm pointing at the moon, moon, qamar, qamar is moon, I say hadha qamarun. This is a moon. So I can use these pointing nouns to point at people and things, but there are some exceptions, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So that's for the singular, masculine and singular feminine. For the dual, we have hadhani, and you can see the alif khanjariya written there. So aslan, it's hadhani like that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters. Hadhani means these two. If I'm pointing at 2 things or 2 boys or 2 men, I say hadhani, assuming the things are masculine. If I'm pointing at 2 things that are feminine or 2 girls or 2 women, I say hatani, hatani, which is these 2 for feminine. But if it's a mixed, right, male, female, then I go with this one here because, I go with hadani because hatani is reserved exclusively for the females, 2 females. And finally, you have ha'ula'i, it's for plural, masculine or feminine. As long as you have 3 or more people, or jinn, or angels, you can use ha'ula'i regardless of gender, male or female. Ha'ula'i is used for, the plural pointing noun is only used for humans, angels, and jinns. It cannot be used for animals or things. So what do we use for animals and things? We'll talk about it in chapter 3. Just a short answer is that you use hadhihi, singular feminine, for animals and things that are in plural. Okay, so if you have three or more humans, angels, or jinn, you use ha'ula'i. And if it's animals or objects, three or more, you go with hadhihi. And we'll talk more about that in chapter 3. And if you have two things or people or animals or objects that are masculine, you use hadhani. If you have two things, animals, people, object, jinn, angel, anything dual, you use hadhani or hatani depending on the gender. Now let's look at ha'ula'i in a little more detail. You have ha'ula'i like that. So you have 1, 2, then you have Hamza sitting on the waw. The waw is just a kursi. Remember, I talked about how Hamza needs a kursi. Sometimes the kursi is alif, sometimes it's waw, sometimes it's a dotless ya. Here, the kursi happens to be waw because there's a dhamma on the Hamza. And there are more sophisticated rules and exceptions on the kursi, the chair of Hamza. We'll talk about them in book 2 of this series, inshallah. So ha'ula'i, how many letters? Ha, alif, that's 2. Hamza is 3. Lam is 4. Alif is 5. And then you have I, Hamza again, 6. Here, Hamza doesn't have a kursi. You can see Hamza doesn't have a kursi here because it's preceded by an alif. That's just a general quick rule to help you remember, but there are more sophisticated, detailed, and rules with exceptions. As I mentioned before, we'll talk about them later. So that's it. These are pointing nouns for something that is close. And in case you're wondering, what about the pointing noun for those? We'll do that in the next lesson. The next lesson will talk about that and those. These pointing nouns are for something that is relatively near you. What about pointing nouns for something that is at a distance? We'll talk about them in the next lesson, inshallah. So next, as always, you have practice. You have hadha muslimun, hadhihi muslimatun, hadhani muslimani, hatani muslimatani, ha'ula'i muslimuna, and ha'ula'i muslimat. You notice how ha'ula'i is used for both masculine and feminine. Okay, and one more time, ha'ula'i, which is the plural pointing pronoun, is used only for humans, angels, and jinn of any gender, regardless of gender, as long as there are 3 or more. They're not used for animals and objects. We'll see more of that in chapter 3, inshallah. Complete this practice for katib and jalis. And then in the next lesson, we'll look at pointing nouns for things that are not close. In other words, they're far, inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.